Chapter 10. It had been the longest day of Merlin's life. Every creak of the floorboard made him jump. Every motion seen from the corner of his eyes reminded him of the dangers to come. He made sure not to leave the king's side for a moment, through breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and while performing his daily chores. Even when Arthur decided to train, Merlin happily allowed him to use him as a target. If he couldn't tell Arthur what was going on, the least he could do was keep a watchful eye on him, as long as someone was accompanying Arthur. It would be hard for the Lambda to strike. Sunset found the two in the throne room, and Arthur lounged on his throne in his relaxed clothing, while Merlin stood to attention just a few feet away, determined not to let his guard down. It was then that Merlin felt a pair of eyes watching him, and when he turned his head to look at Arthur, he saw the king studying him with his cheek resting thoughtfully on his fist. "You've been very quiet today, Merlin," Arthur broke the silence. "Is something wrong?" "No," Merlin answered too quickly, and Arthur raised an eyebrow in suspicion. "No, I'm just—" He lied slower now and tried to sound convincing. "Just trying to give you some peace, to make up for my recent lack of presence." Arthur scoffed. "You'll never give me peace, Merlin," he joked, and must have noticed that Merlin didn't so much as smile in return. "Well, if you're not going to be much company, you can go," he said with a wave of his hand. "I could use the time to think anyway." Merlin stood up straighter, his eyes wide as he took a few steps closer to the throne. "I can't," he said urgently, trying to think of an excuse. "The day is hardly over. You may still need me," was the best he could come up with. "Why have you been so clingy?" "I don't see anything wrong with a little loyalty," Merlin told him. "You're my king." For a moment, Arthur looked hurt. He brought his hand down from his face and seemed to consider his servant. "Is that all I am, Merlin?" There was a pause, and Merlin narrowed his eyes and looked at the king in question. But before he could say anything, Arthur grinned playfully and said in his normal tone, "What's gotten into you today? Tell me." "It's nothing." "Good," Arthur said, seeming to accept this. "Then you'll let me be to work on your speech," Merlin finished hurriedly. "I know. I can help you with it." Arthur smirked but rolled his eyes. "In a few days it will be first anniversary of my father's death," he said a bit sadly, "and of the day I became king. I have to address my people, and this speech can't be off the cuff. It needs to come from the heart. I have to consider my words carefully." When it was clear that Merlin still wasn't getting the message, Arthur finished with, "Alone?" "I can write it down while you think," Merlin insisted. "Or you could go polish my armor and sharpen my sword for Guinevere's arrival tomorrow while you wait," Arthur countered. "But get out," Arthur said calmly, pointing towards the door, and Merlin knew better than to press the matter. He didn't feel comfortable leaving Arthur alone, but there was no way he could stay with him without piquing Arthur's suspicion. So Merlin reluctantly turned to take his leave. Midway down the hall, Merlin stopped and peered over his shoulder at Arthur, watching the fading sunlight highlight his golden hair and making his handsome blue eyes sparkle. "Promise you'll send for me if you need anything," Merlin said, and he heard Arthur give an amused chuckle. "Merlin, I'm going," he said, holding his hands up in mock surrender. But as he exited the throne room, he saw two guards walking down the corridor. "You men," he called to them, getting their attention. He tilted his head towards the door. "Stand guard for the king. Stay at this post, but don't disturb him unless it's completely necessary." The guards did as they were told, and Merlin felt better for it, but not by much. Still, at least Arthur wouldn't be alone. As he made his way down to the armory, he kept a watchful eye out for any of the Lambda that could be sneaking through the castle. His mind was so focused on that task that he failed to see long leg protruding onto the path, and he had to stumble to regain his balance while he tripped over it. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you there," he said apologetically to the owner of the leg. It was another guard. He was sitting against the stone wall, his head lolled to the side as he snored softly. Merlin jerked his head back and wrinkled his nose in wonder. "That's certainly an odd place to fall asleep," he thought, not thinking any more of it. Not until he turned the corner and saw two other guards sprawled out on the floor in a deep sleep. Merlin felt himself start to panic. He knew something was wrong. "Arthur," he breathed, turning on his heels and heading for his chamber. He had to get to the others. He may need their help. Sam and Dean stood across from each other, looking down at the man on the white cot. "Man, I don't like this," Dean said, shaking his head down at Gaius. "Shit like this doesn't just happen." "Dean, the doctor said he's just sleeping," Sam said weakly. Even though the doctor had insisted this, Sam had to admit it was a bit odd that the way the man suddenly dropped where he was standing. He looked over his shoulder to the doctor, who was still preoccupied with running tests on the statue, like he had been doing all day, and muttering under his breath. If he'd found anything, he wasn't saying. While the doctor worked, the others prepared themselves for the inevitable. They decided that Sam, Roy, and Amy would each hold onto a sword from the TARDIS, as the doctor said he was never one for weapons. On the other hand, Dean, who's always been a big proponent of weapons, had taken out his favorite Colt and said, "I'd like to see him get past this." However, besides distributing weapons, the group had little more to do than twirl their thumbs and watch the doctor work. By sunset, Sam was restless. He would never admit it, but he was somewhat glad when the door suddenly slammed open and Merlin came rushing into the room. "What happened?" Merlin demanded. "The entire castle has fallen asleep." His eyes fell on Gaius. He took a steady breath in. The doctor looked up from his work at this. "What?" For a genius, he really does miss the obvious, Sam thought. He should have gone with his gut. He knew something funny was going on. The doctor dashed towards the window. "It's the whole city," he reported, and the others crowded around the small window to see for themselves. Sure enough, the city below them was deadly quiet, and Sam even saw a few sleeping bodies littered about the streets. "How could a whole city just fall asleep?" Amy questioned. "It's magic," Merlin told her. "It has to be." "Well, what about us?" asked Roy. Why haven't we been affected?" "The TARDIS is protecting us," the doctor reasoned. "Except Merlin. His abilities must be helping him along." "Well, I'll tell you what's bothering me," Dean voiced, his eyes meeting Amy's. "You think this is what Morgana meant by when Camelot falls asleep?" Sam saw Amy open her mouth to answer, but as she spoke, the shattering sound of glass and wood from behind them drowned her words out. Sam spun around immediately and took a look at the statue of the stunned Lambda, but all he saw was a flash of white speed through the door and the large broken hunks of stone that the creature left in her wake. "Arthur!" Merlin shouted, and ran after the escaped Lambda. "No, Merlin!" Sam called after him, but he was already gone. "Damn it!" From next to him, the doctor sped off after Merlin, and Sam could hear his voice fading as he rushed down the corridor. "Don't take your eyes off her!" Amy and Rory followed the doctor. "Come on, Sammy. Time's a-wastin'," Dean muttered, and took off too. Sam reached for his black sword on the table and shoved it into his belt, and joined in on the chase. It didn't take long for Sam to catch up, with the others, and his long legs even helped him pass Dean and Amy. The Lambda was close in front of them, and she led them down the length of the long, moonlit corridor, passing sleeping bodies that were strewn across the castle. As she ran, the woman was muttering some dead language loudly, and, once they were at the other side of the corridor, Sam heard the door that he had just passed swing open. Another Lambda came through it, blocking Dean and Amy's way through to the others, and they skidded to a halt as not to get close to the woman. Sam looked behind his shoulder as he ran, just in time to see the second Lambda slap her hand forcefully against the wall, and then began running swiftly back down the corridor from where the group came. Once she was clear, a section of the ceiling collapsed, separating Sam and the others from Dean and Amy, with a wall of fallen stone. The doctor, Rory, and Merlin spun around automatically to see what the commotion was. "Dean!" Sam shouted and ran to the rocks. Rory was right behind him. "Amy!" There was a pause in which Sam could hear his heart thumping in his ears, and then Amy's muffled voice sounded through the breeze. Through the debris. "It's okay, we're all right." "She's getting away," Merlin called, and shot off down the hallway after the Lambda. The doctor hesitated, but then followed him. "Go, Sammy," Sam heard Dean's voice shout. "We'll take care of the wicked witch of the West." With that, Sam and Rory heard rushed footsteps as Dean and Amy ran back down the hallway. Soon enough, they found their way back to Merlin and the doctor, who had apparently managed to catch up with the Lambda. She ran past a pile of at least 7 guards, all of whom had dropped where they stood, and swooped down to graze one's cheek. When she was clear on the other side of them, the group of guards rose up and blocked the passage between the Lambda and the group. Sam slid to a halt as he saw the guards draw their swords in unison, daring them to come closer. There was no way they could get past them without a fight. "Doctor, you and Merlin go ahead," Sam said, taking out the black blade from his belt, Rory following his lead. "Me and Rory will hold him off." Without hesitation, Merlin looked around wildly for another way through the pack of guards, and found a closed door to a stairwell on his left. "This way," he called to the doctor, and pushed through the door. Once the other two were gone, Sam readied his sword, staring down the guards. His father made him and Dean learn the way around almost any weapon, and the sword was no exception. He had plenty of experience, but he couldn't say the same for Rory. Ever used a sword before? He chuckled. I'd have over 2,000 years of training, Rory answered nonchalantly. Sam did a double take at Rory and then pulled a passive face and shrugged. Like he'd said before, there wasn't much that could surprise him after that day. I believe you. The possessed guards charged towards them, one of them raising his weapons and trying to bring it down on Sammy, and Sam lifted his own sword to block the blow, but it never came. A perplexed Sam looked down at the swords and saw that they weren't even touching. The guard's blade was hovering inches from his own, and the man was grunting and struggling to get his sword to meet the other. Sam felt his blade vibrating softly, and it emitted a low chime. He glanced at Rory, who was experiencing a similar moment, and he remembered what the doctor said about the swords. They'd be able to block the Lambda's magic. They couldn't lose this fight. Realizing the same, the guards gave up and, wide-eyed, began backing away slowly. Sam caught Rory's eye, and they both grinned slyly, their thoughts on the same page. It was their turn to charge. Amy and Dean flew down the corridor in pursuit of the second Lambda, careful not to let her turn any corners or get out of their eyeshot without being close behind. They didn't want her to get too much of a lead. They came upon a split in the hallway, and the Lambda flew down the right side. Dean stumbled to a halt. Follow her. I'm going to see if I can cut her off, he shouted to Amy, who was still running after the Lambda. Dean cupped his hands over his mouth to amplify his voice and called, Don't let her get out of your sight. Then he veered to the left and raced down the second hallway, hoping it would somehow connect to where the Lambda was heading. He was running blind, not really knowing his way around the castle, but he was breaking on the fact that the Lambda didn't either. After a few moments of running, he came to a tall wooden door at the end of the corridor and busted through it, finally coming to a stop in the room beyond. On the opposite wall, he noticed another door, which suddenly flung open to reveal the Lambda. When she saw Dean, she made the mistake of halting. Amy was right behind her, now pressing her black sword threateningly against the small of the woman's back. Don't move, Amy warned. But the woman was muttering something under her breath. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from behind Dean as the door he'd come through exploded and made splinters rain down on them. Dean immediately threw his arms over his head and doubled over to shield himself from the wood, but Amy was thrown back against the stone wall, her sword now laying uselessly on the floor a few feet away. When the debris from the explosion had subsided, Dean heard Amy give a soft groan, telling him that she was alive and conscious, but Dean wondered for how long. He looked up quickly and saw the Lambda hovering over Amy, her fingers outstretched towards her skin. Dean leaped forward, pulled his Colt out from his jeans waistline, pressed it to the Lambda's head. He wasn't allowing her a second chance. Welcome to the 21st century, bitch, he said, and emptied a bullet into the woman's temple. Merlin skidded to a halt inside the throne room as the doctor stayed behind to inspect the limp bodies of the guard at the foot of the doors. But Merlin didn't need the doctor to know the men were already dead. The Lambda wouldn't risk them waking up, because Morgana wouldn't risk it. Not when she was so close to victory. He just had to get to Arthur before he suffered the same fate as the guards. The first Lambda had joined the group that had congregated in the hall. There was a little less than 20 of them, and Merlin could no longer tell one apart from the other. All the women were huddled together, each slowly advancing towards the throne, and through the white mass of their dresses, Merlin saw a flash of red. Arthur's shirt. Oh well, he wouldn't be in chainmail, Merlin thought. Stop it, I command you to, Arthur was shouting as he backed away from the group, making sure to keep his distance. His eyes kept wavering from one woman to another as Arthur was unsure what to do, or what any of them were planning to do. It wasn't as though they were armed. Still, they advanced, their hands held up to the king in search of a bare piece of flesh. Arthur! Merlin shouted, attracting the attention of the group. Seize him, one of the Lambda hissed, and the others turned their advance on him. No, Merlin, Arthur called desperately, reaching his hand out fruitlessly towards his servant, and a Lambda clambered at his shirt. Panic filled Merlin as he looked over the Lambda, his eyes catching Arthur's through the crowd. He couldn't use magic. He couldn't. Arthur would see him. But there were too many Lambda, and there was nothing else Merlin had to protect Arthur. He had no choice. Taking a shaky breath in to calm himself, he stretched his palm out to the woman. His eyes flashed a brilliant gold, and his voice echoed through the hall as he shouted, Astris bebidepe Arsian. If Merlin didn't know better, he'd say Arthur had turned stone with the Lampna. His sad blue eyes were fixed on Merlin, his mouth slightly agape, and that's when Merlin noticed the stone hand that rested on Arthur's cheek. The king's eyes rolled back, and he fell heavily onto the stone floor. Arthur! Merlin shouted, instinctively running toward him. But Arthur, who was already struggling to sit up, put a hand up, signaling Merlin to stop where he was, before gripping his side and letting out a painful grunt. Don't come any closer, Merlin struggled to shout. Stay where you are. Stay away from me. Merlin stopped running immediately, more so at Arthur's words than because of them. He was mere feet away from Arthur, his arm swinging uselessly at his side, his eyes already welling up. No, he said, shaking his head forcefully and holding back tears. No, Arthur, you will die. I said stay where you are. Merlin was vaguely aware of Dean and Amy rushing into the throne room, Sam and Rory and Toad just moments later. Arthur's eyes flashed behind Merlin at the newcomers, at Sam as he propped himself up against the leg of his throne. Merlin tried to hold his gaze, but he faltered. All this time, Merlin said, his voice softer now, and Merlin wished he would scream instead. It would be easier that way. You had magic all this time. Arthur wore a strange, mixed expression. One that suggested the reveal of this secret was one he never had seen coming. And yet, he'd been expecting it for quite some time. Merlin could almost see the king's mind reeling, thinking back to all those instances when the word magic must have crossed his mind whenever he pondered on the puzzle that was his servant, an idea that was quickly dismissed but only seemed to linger like a pest in the back of his consciousness. Merlin wondered if the word evil even was often considered next. Please, Arthur, just listen, Merlin tried to reason, and dared to take a single step forward. Arthur's eyes were like daggers. You gotta let me help you. Help me? Arthur spat, letting out a hollow laugh. For all I know, you could be working with Morgana. No, I've only ever wanted to protect you. To protect Camelot. You have to trust me. You lied to me, Arthur boomed. How can I ever trust you? Do you think I'm an idiot? The strain was too much, and Arthur started coughing wildly, causing blood to pour from his lips. He clenched his side again and doubled over, but his other hand held up again to stop Merlin when he tried to get closer. When the coughing fit ended, his eyes met Merlin's, and the sorcerer noticed that they were redder than before, contrasting with the brilliant blue. Arthur tried desperately to show anger in them instead of pain. You're the only one I trusted through and through, Arthur nearly whispered. I thought of you as a friend, Merlin. Merlin felt his heart shatter. Arthur, please, he choked, and took in a shuddering gasp. There was no reply. Merlin's jaw clenched as he registered the light in Arthur's eyes had gone out. Arthur? The king lay motionless. Arthur! Finally, he ran the extra few steps towards Arthur and fell to his side, trying his best to shake him awake. Behind him, the others exchanged solemn looks, but dared not to speak, as Merlin tried every healing spell he could think of, to no avail. It was the doctor who finally stepped forward and ghosted his sonic screwdriver over Arthur's body. When the buzzing had stopped, he glanced at the readings and saw what he expected. He's dead, he said softly, looking down at Merlin, who didn't look back. I'm sorry. Dead? Sam spoke up from behind them. How can he be dead? I thought his death is a fixed point or something, right? Merlin almost broke his neck with the speed in which he looked back at Sam, then faced the doctor, fractured bits of hope illuminating his soaked eyes. That's right, he said. You said it yourself. Arthur cannot die here. He searched the doctor's face for confirmation, but received none. Time can be rewritten, he said sheepishly, not looking Merlin in the eyes. Merlin's face fell, and his glance fell on Arthur once more. No, he said at last, the sorrow in his voice turning to anger. He stood up and faced the doctor. Time and time again, I've been told that it's my destiny to protect Arthur, that he will rule over the greatest kingdom this world has ever known, and that I must help him. Albon must come to be, and that's what I've been told. You've even said it, Doctor. The doctor looked up at him, and a bit of the despair seeped back into Merlin's voice. Do not tell me there's another path. I can't. You control time, Merlin pleaded. We can try again. We can go back and save him. He's already gone, the doctor said, somewhat forcefully, as he gestured over to Arthur. Going back and saving him would cause a paradox. He registered Merlin's expression of part confusion, part apathy. It's a rip in time and space. Who knows what the consequences would be? I don't care, Merlin shouted back. And he truly didn't. What did it matter to him if time fell apart or the world ended? For him, it already had the moment Arthur's heart stopped beating. The least he could do was make it official. The doctor held his gaze and muttered, "I do." There was a pause until Amy said, "Doctor?" She moved towards him and rested a hand on his crossed forearms. "Maybe he's right," she started. "Maybe Arthur still does die in the future. Maybe because you saved him today." She smiled softly, knowing she was getting through to the doctor in the way only she could. The doctor's eyes flickered from her to Merlin to Arthur. "Maybe," he said finally, his voice bright once more. Merlin seemed to perk up as well. "If we go back far enough to stop the Lambda before the past us get here, yes, the TARDIS may be able to sustain the paradox." "Great, let's do it," Dean decided. The doctor was still hesitant. He left Amy's side and paced around the room. "It's just, we'd have to do it quickly. After Merlin turns them to stone, we'd have to get a Lambda into the TARDIS so it could work out the tear in time. Or else the universe could fall apart." "Right, so no pressure," Dean said a little less confidently than before. The doctor stood still. "It's up to you, Merlin," he said. All eyes fell on Merlin. "What do you say?" Merlin gulped. He looked around at the stone Lambda, their eyes covered in sorrow to resemble the statues that started this mess. Then he looked down at Arthur's lifeless body, the man that Merlin swore to protect, the man who didn't even accept who Merlin really was in the end. Was there ever even a choice? Merlin looked up at the others and smiled. Chapter 11. Merlin led them out of the castle and into the courtyard, where the TARDIS still stood waiting for them. The doctor ran ahead of the others to its doors and jammed the key inside the lock. The rest of the group followed him through the open doors and met him at the console deck, and he was already working on starting up the engines. At once, Sam noticed that Merlin had not joined them around the consoles, and he looked back at the door to find him still standing in front of them, his mouth wide with awe. "It's magic," he said with a swallow once he found his voice, trying to make sense of it all. However, the doctor let out a singular laugh. "That's what I keep trying to tell you," he said. "It's science." He flipped the last lever, and the TARDIS rattled and shook, shooting them through the time vortex. Sam held onto the railing around the console tightly and let out an excited holler as Dean stumbled back and forth, latching onto Sam's shirt for support. He looked like he was going to be sick. Sam noticed Rory and Amy holding onto the edges of the console, and the doctor was holding himself up with his hands on two levers and one leg propped up on another edge. As for Merlin, the sudden movement had made his feet get thrown out from underneath him, and he landed hard on his back. Just as Sam had begun to enjoy the ride, the loud clang of the engines and the movement ceased as fast as it had started, and everyone collected themselves. The doctor moved away from the console to address the group and rubbed his palms together eagerly. "I've brought us back to 5 minutes before the Lambda broke out the stone casing. That should give us enough time to do what we have to do," he started. "Right, Merlin, I need you to get Arthur out of the throne room any way you can. Just make sure he's out of there before the Lambda show up." Merlin nodded doubtfully. "We're going to," Sam told the doctor, speaking for himself and Dean. Dean stepped up next to his brother in solitary. "Kid might need some help," he said. The doctor looked between them and said, "He's got it." He turned back to Merlin. "Once you've turned them into stone, Amy, Rory, and I will land the TARDIS in the throne room. We've got to get a Lambda into the ship before the past versions of us get there." "We'll make sure he's not late," Amy assured Merlin, but it only made him visibly more nervous. The doctor ignored the comment. "Now, we've only got one go at this, so make it count." The group broke and Merlin couldn't get out of the TARDIS fast enough. Sam and Dean right behind him. When Sam closed the door once they had exited, he noticed they were in a small room next to a stairwell. In front of them was a modest wooden door, and Sam reasoned it must be the back way into the throne room. The TARDIS roared and disappeared behind them, and Merlin cracked the door so the three of them could stick their heads and peer through. They saw the side of King Arthur sitting on his throne, apparently deep in thought. They all stood straight in unison, and Merlin closed the door. "Let me talk to him alone," he said. "I'll call when I need you." You sure? Sam wondered. He didn't know if Merlin would be able to face Arthur after what had just happened. And there was also doubt in Merlin's eyes. Still, there wasn't much of a choice. Just stay here, Merlin said sharply, and slid through the door. Arthur, you've got to get out of here. Merlin didn't spare any time to say. He jogged in front of the throne and faced a very perturbed-looking Arthur. I thought I told you to let me be, he said. Would you just listen? Merlin snapped. He tried his hardest to hold Arthur's gaze, but it was more difficult than he expected. He felt his heart sink into his stomach as Arthur lifted himself from his throne and walked over to meet Merlin. I knew there was something the matter with you, Arthur said in a near gloat, but there was worry in his voice. Have you finally come to tell me? Arthur, please, there isn't any time. You've got to come with me. Not and tell me what this is all about, Arthur said stubbornly, stupidly. Just trust me, Merlin pleaded, taking a small pause before he added, as a friend. Arthur searched Merlin's face. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. Merlin... In the midst of the debate, Merlin hadn't noticed Dean and Sam sneak into the room and behind Arthur. Dean had Sam's blade in his hands, and he swiftly raised it above Arthur's head and brought the blunt side crashing down onto the king's skull. Arthur's eyes fluttered in a daze, and then he fell face first onto the ground. He was knocked out cold. Dean looked over at Sam, pulled a face, and shrugged. Sam copied his brother's expression. Merlin pressed his lips together. Well, that's certainly one way to do it, he said aloud, wondering why he hadn't thought of that years ago. From outside the main doors of the hall, he heard the stampede of footfalls, and he spun just in time to see the large group of Lambda appear. There was a pause as the group looked at Merlin, Dean, and Sam with slight confusion, but then one of them hissed, Kill them! But Merlin was ready. Just as they began to charge, he held up his hand to them and chanted, Astris bebite arsen. The Lambda froze in their places, each of them turning to solid stone angels. Immediately after, a severe wind picked up inside the room, followed by a metallic clang as the TARDIS appeared and reappeared between the two thrones, and Merlin had to cover his face with his arms in an attempt to keep the wind from blowing him too much. The doors creaked open, and out came the Doctor and his companions, all of them studying the scene before them. The Doctor looked at Sam and Dean, who were standing over an unconscious Arthur, as they stared back at him guiltily. I leave you for 5 minutes, the Doctor feigned into discipline. Doctor, Amy shouted, panic in her voice. Her eyes were wide in the directions of the statues, and she and Rory didn't dare take their eyes off them. That was when Merlin realized the statues had moved. Some of them had their arms held over their heads, bearing vicious fangs, and others had an arm outstretched towards the group, and others still had remained in their original weeping pose. Ah, yes, the Doctor said, doing a bad job at hiding worry in his tone. I was afraid that would happen. It was always a possibility. Amy, keep your eyes on them. Rory, Merlin, help me get one into the TARDIS, quickly. Merlin spun back around to Sam and Dean. Get Arthur to his chambers, he ordered. It's directly above us. Sam and Dean nodded, picked Arthur up from both ends, and struggled to carry him out of the room. Merlin rushed over to help the Doctor and Rory bring an angel into the console room. They made sure to keep their eyes peeled on her, just in case she managed to come to life. It took them a few moments, but they finally managed to get it past the door. Right, the Doctor said, running to the console, pulling some gadgets that were completely foreign to Merlin's eyes. We need to get out of here. Where are Dean and Sam? They took Arthur to his room, Merlin exclaimed. The Doctor looked up from the controls, agitated. How long does it take to carry someone to their bedroom? I'll find them. Merlin ran out of the TARDIS just as Sam and Dean scrambled to a halt beside one another inside the room. But they looked as though they were ready to start running again at any moment. The Doctor ran out to meet them, too. Good news, Sam announced. People are starting to wake up. Yeah, but we might have a slight problem, Dean finished for him. From upstairs, outside of the throne room, Merlin heard the loud call of a guard. You men, stop where you are! The Doctor swung his arm up and pointed behind him at the TARDIS with his thumb. Get in. No one needed to be told twice. Merlin was the last through the doors. Just before he got into the ship, he made eye contact with himself, who had entered the room, and suddenly faded into nothingness. The Doctor was at the console again, pushing buttons and pulling levers as they took off. I managed to use the psychic link between the angel to tether the others, just giving them a tow. That includes the original statues they brought with them. They're a part of this now. Whatever holds the image of an angel becomes itself an angel, Amy explained, and the doctor snapped his fingers and pointed at her. Where will you put them? Merlin asked. You can't possibly keep them here with you. No, the doctor agreed. I'll bring them to the safest place in the universe. The beginning of it. The TARDIS gave one last great shudder, and then all went calm. Momentarily, the doctor rushed towards the doors of the ship and opened them, revealing the dense darkness of space beyond, glittering with pricks of bright light. The doctor held out his sonic screwdriver and pointed it towards the weeping angel on the ship, which then began to slide towards the open entrance. It somersaulted through the vacuum. Come take a look, the doctor told the others. I've set up an oxygen bubble around the TARDIS. It's safe. Sam looked unsurely towards Dean, and then he, Dean, and Merlin crowded around the entrance. Amory and Rory and the doctor stood close behind them, grinning widely at each other as they watched. Sam could hardly believe what he was seeing. They were floating in mid-space, darkness like a blanket around, interrupted by bright multitudes of colors swirling around underneath them. He saw the other weeping angels tumble downwards through space, all headed for a bright white ball in the center of a distant mass. This is the formation of Mintaka, a star in the constellation of Orion, the doctor explained, in a voice that sounded like a dream. It's brand new. I've disposed of the angels inside the birthing star. Gravity will do the rest. They'll get imprisoned in the center of it. Sam tore his gaze away from the sight and eyed Dean, to gauge his brother's reaction. The swirling mass of far-off lights were reflected in Dean's bright green eyes, and his lips were parted in stunned silence. Sam never imagined anything would quiet Dean like that. He looked back outside the doors at the angels falling towards the fire, and he wondered how something so giant and so monstrous could be so beautiful. Will they ever free themselves? He heard Merlin say from behind him, a hint of sorrow in his voice. Sam was astounded in the fact that, after everything they had done, Merlin still felt sorry for them. Oh, of course, one day, was the doctor's answer. They got a few billion years before any nosy neighbors come poking about to slow them down. Then he left their side and headed back to the console. The others followed, and Sam reluctantly closed the door behind him to join them. So, you're saying we made the weeping angels? Dean was questioning. The TARDIS created them, corrected the doctor. The Lambda were creatures of great power. With enough time, one of them managed to break out of a stone casing, and that was under normal circumstances. Imagine what they'd achieve while time was fracturing around them. So the TARDIS did the only thing it could do, reverse the paradox and feed the time vortex back into the angels' psychic link, holding them in their stony stasis. He turned to Amy, who was smiling back at him. Well, that explains their ability to send people through time. Come again? Dean said with a lick of his lips, a beyond confused look on his face. He scratched at his bronze-freckled forehead. Pretend I'm 7. It made sure that time was strong enough to keep the angels stone. It didn't keep them from animating, but it slowed them down. The doctor looked up at the time order and said to the machine, You sexy thing, you. Yeah, but why make people time jump? What's the point? Sam wondered. Isn't it obvious? The doctor said, but he was met with his blank stares. I always thought that you did it for sustenance, but now I see it's for another reason altogether. The Lambda are servants, cursed forever to do their duty. They're looking for Camelot. They're looking for you, Sam, he explained. Of course, with all of time and space to sort through, it'll take some time, but centuries later, they're still trying to fulfill their orders, to kill the king. The weeping angels are creatures of potential energy. They're just trying to find another time stream, to send Sam back so they could give themselves another try. Potentially, they can still kill Arthur and change the future. Merlin raised his eyes to this. Will they ever exceed? The doctor smiled warmly at him. Not while I'm around, he promised. He circled around the controls, getting them back en route to Camelot. How's that for destiny, he mused, pausing to direct his eyes at Merlin. A paradox.